Hello again, thank you for being here. I'm Justin. How many people are new? First time at Morning Startup today. Welcome. That's a lot of you. Thanks for that. Why did you come here? Anybody? I know it's early.
I met somebody who did the startup weekend and he said I should come to these and see what it's like. So this is my first one to come along and see what it's like.
And what are you hoping to get out of it?
I have no idea. I've come with open mind. I'm a futurist and I'm looking to start up a social enterprise in community catering.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Anybody else hoping to start something?
Yeah. Go ahead.
The topic is actually quite relevant.
Great.
I only heard about it yesterday.
How did you hear about it? How did you hear about it?
A tweet.
I released the WordPress app last year, and the pricing and freemium model talk interested me. I came last week, my first time, but being in this space, it's fun. I enjoyed the last week's startup. So.
Cool. Well, what we hope to do at Morning Startup is introduce you to some speakers that can help you along your way in your journey to either start something, run something.
World domination.
World domination.
Okay. Yeah.
Generally, we focus on tech startups, but there are plenty of people running social enterprise, looking to do other kinds of business like that. The way that we'll do that is by having an expert speaker on a given topic. You'll hear from that speaker, then we'll do some Q&A, and then we'll have an opportunity to do some networking. So I think one of the great bits of value that we can offer, aside from Claire this morning, is the chance to meet your peers and get to know them. So I highly encourage you to do that at the break. We'd also like to keep you informed of things that are going on in the community. So you're in Space Cube, which is a great hub of tech and social startups in Perth, and they do a good job of announcing things that are going on in our community, so highly encourage you to check out their website. In addition, we've got some events coming up that I should tell you about. One that I'm particularly keen on is called Unearthed. On March 20th in this space, some of Perth's top developer talent will get to work on some problems submitted by industry partners, so companies including Aluka Resources. Last year we were working with Rio Tinto and BHP among others, so largely resources companies who have problems that can be addressed by technology. We'll work with local entrepreneurs and technologists to come up with prototype solutions to their problems. And we haven't announced it yet, but we've got over $30,000 of prize money and credits available to be won during the course of that weekend. So if you're at all interested in joining a team and having a crack at some problems submitted by mining industry and companies around Perth, have a look at unearthed.solutions for that. Any other events that we know about going on we should tell people about? Steph?
I just got in town a few days ago, so sorry.
Steph got jet lag.
I've got one.
There.
I was going to talk about it sort of in the midst of the stuff I'm going to cover, but I used to be the director for the local chapter of the Perth Founder Institute, and I've handed over the reins to two new co-directors for this year, and they'll be announcing their semester dates in the next couple of weeks.
Cool. Founder Institute, for those of you that don't know, is a fantastic way to, I was going to say get the shit kicked out of you, but it's a bit early for that kind of language. So
It's definitely good at that kind of language.
Bootcamp for startups, highly recommended. Claire put people through their paces in the previous two programs, and now she's got some excellent folks to take over, as she suggested. What's the website, fi.co?
Yeah, fi.co. So effectively a 14-week program, part-time, after hours, to help you take your startup from idea stage to readiness to launch, effectively.
Founder Institute was one of the first accelerator type programs to come to Perth, and we seem to be getting close to peak accelerator in Perth. I think we've announced 2 or 3 in the last 3 months, a couple of which are housed upstairs, including Amcom Upstart. So if you've got an idea that's fairly well along, or a prototype, and you are interested in getting some cash to take your business further, you can check out, mess up their address, search for Amcom Upstart. They are a technology accelerator that focuses on early stage startups. I think they offer $40,000 for 8%, and one of their esteemed mentors is in the room in the back there. Why don't you mind? We also launched an Unearthed accelerator, which we'll be telling the world more about soon. That's for companies, again, focused on the resources sector who need seed capital, connection to mentors, and a hand up to bring their new products to market that are focused on helping resources companies become more efficient and productive globally. So again, welcome to Morning Startup. I'm Justin. I'll hand over to Steph now, who's going to tell you about Claire, who we'll hear from very shortly.
Good, well I'm glad Claire mentioned that she's not a director at FI anymore, because I was about to say that and I would have given you false information. But Claire was a director at FI, as she pointed out. I think they've graduated about 15 startups in the last 2 years, and I'm part of obviously a global network, as Justin's already mentioned. But most recently, Claire's also co-founder and revenue bot, I guess that's the same as growth hacker, maybe, at Appbot. Let me just check my notes, because this is so Appbot is a SaaS startup that has developers and product managers, helps them to increase revenues from their apps by analysing and interpreting app store performance and customer sentiment. I think that's about right. Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. Excellent.
Now with the elevator pitch.
All right. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Claire.
Beautiful.
Welcome, Claire. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Who's awake? Put your hand in the air if you're awake. Oh, wow. Okay, that's tragic. That's okay. I feel a lot less pressure now. Right, can I flick through these sponsor slides?
Yes, sorry.
Steph? Here are some sponsors. Yes, this is Justin's job. I'll do it for him. Big thanks to the Beecham Group, Business News, Space Cube, and Voltage Espresso. Where are Voltage Espresso here? Why are they not, like, pumping me full of sweet caffeine?
Would you like a coffee? We can sort that.
After, yeah, definitely. Yeah, cool. Hi everybody, I'm Claire, and I guess I recognise some faces. Put your hand in the air if I've met you somewhere before. Oh yeah, a few. Okay, that's nice. So I'm going to talk to you this morning about pricing and value for startups, and this has sort of come from my several years of experience knocking around with different startups in all kinds of different contexts. So this is me in pictures. I was actually once upon a time a vet, of all strange things, and I practiced as a small animal vet for about 5 years, and it made me really not want to get out of bed in the morning. So I decided to do something different, got involved with a startup now, and here I am. And that startup was medicanimal.com, which is now the UK's largest pet and vet online retailer. And I joined that team right at the very beginning when we were turning over about £94 a day. And when I left 3.5 years later, they were turning over about £25 million per annum. So that was a really terrifyingly fast growth rate and super fun experience. And my role there started out actually as part of their vet team, and I built their pharmacy software and so forth. And I ended up their marketing and product director through a long series of events I won't bore you with. So marketing and product's kind of what I love, what I know about, what I like to talk to people about. And I came back to Perth for personal reasons and started doing some consulting work, ended up working for companies like L'Oreal. I built apps for hairdressers for about 6 months. And if any of you are considering doing that, can I please encourage you to rethink that decision right now? It was very, very difficult. And that convinced me I didn't want to do the big corporate thing. So after that, I got involved in the local ecosystem, met good folk like Justin. We ran a startup weekend. I met my partner at the Founder Institute, and I started running that. And I've been pretty connected with the Perth startup scene ever since. So as Steph said, we've graduated 15 companies from FI. There'll be another semester this year, which I'm very excited about. We've got 2 fantastic new directors, Andrew Hall, who comes from both a venture capital background, and he has also been on the managerial side of startups as well. And Kirsten Rose, who's the state manager for the Australian Institute of Company Directors. So the local chapter of FI is in safe hands, I think. So whilst I was running FI, I also went to work for Agworld, which is one of the better funded, more successful startups to come out of Perth in recent years. And Agworld is an ag tech software business, also a SaaS company. And my role there was head of marketing. And I guess that was sort of the first moment that I really plunged headlong into SaaS businesses and pricing and freemium, not freemium, trials, all that sort of stuff. And so a lot of the stuff I'm going to share with you today actually came from my initial period at Agworld. And more recently, I've been fortunate enough to be invited to be advisor to some companies. A few rocking a t-shirt, and Steph told you about what Appbot does, but yeah, it's very exciting times for us. We're about to make our first hire. We just signed If This Then That as a customer last night, Etsy about 3 days ago, Tinder on the weekend, Disney a couple of weeks ago. So it's going very, very well. And basically at this point in time, my role at Appbot is to spend my life thinking about what I'm going to talk to you guys about today. I talk really, really, really fast. This is actually me attempting to moderate that. If I'm going too fast, someone please tell me. And if you've got questions as I'm going, feel free to throw your hand in the air. I'm going to try and get through quite a bit of stuff, so I'll move it at a decent pace, but shout if it's getting away from you. So, the first thing we're going to talk about is to free or not to free. That is the question. And the reason I wanted to bring this point up first is because almost every startup that I've been involved with or that I've helped through FI or Startup Weekend or anything like that, most of them plan to incorporate some sort of free offering into their product mix or service offering. And that can be a very useful tool to help you bridge the credibility gap that you fall into when you're a brand new company and no one knows who you are. Offering something for free, it's always much easier to sell than asking people to part with their hard-earned cash straight off the bat. But it's fraught with a few challenges, and it can make it very difficult to find a path to revenue later on. So I'm going to talk about a few different types of free, freemium being the first one of those. I'm going to talk about free trials, and then I'm briefly going to touch on whether or not offering your product free to early adopters is, in my opinion, a worthwhile thing to do, or whether, in fact, there's a better way to approach it. So, does anyone here want to have a stab at giving us a kind of definition of what freemium actually means?
It's providing your product in pretty much its whole sense with the ability to purchase the full version or parts of it or upgrade parts. I mean, I do a WordPress plugin, I've got extensions.
Yeah, right.
So my platform
That's
is
a nice example.
this, and then I've got bits that make it even better.
Yeah, so you have a part of your product that's permanently free for people.
Correct.
Yeah. So that's kind of how to think about freemium. If you've got something in your offering that's always free for customers to use, the example I like to point to is often Dropbox. No matter how long ago you signed up for Dropbox, if you want to pull everything out of your Dropbox at some point, you can still go back to having less than 2 gig of storage, and that'll be free for you again. So, and that's their standard offering. It exists all the time, and you can drop in and out of using that as you see fit. So, when I first joined Agworld, actually, Agworld had a freemium model, and I spent quite a bit of time getting my head around like when it's a good idea to have a freemium model and when it's a bit of a dangerous call to have a freemium model. And these are the 3 basic litmus tests, if you like, that I came up with from reading tons and tons of stuff to help you decide whether or not a freemium model could work for you. The first one is there any inherent virality in your product? And what I mean by that is whether or not people have to share your product with other people in order to get the most out of the product. So I'm going to come back to that Dropbox example again. Dropbox is at its best when you're using it to collaborate and share with other people. And so we would consider that business to have inherent virality. And the reason that's important is because with a freemium model, only a small portion of your users are ever going to encounter the conversion lever, the thing that makes them pay. And so the virality helps you to ensure that there's as much coming into the top of the funnel as humanly possible. So you maximize the number of people that are going to encounter that conversion lever, and therefore you can have some assurance that you'll be able to maintain a reasonable level of revenue. The second point is whether or not you've got a low incremental cost per user. If it costs you a lot to deliver your solution, a freemium model will kill you. Because you'll be paying to support a whole bunch of free users, and as I said, only a small portion of those are ever going to be likely to convert. And when you think about the proportion of people that are going to convert, don't just think about the proportion of people that that could convert, think about those that actually will. So what I mean by that is if you've got 100 people that sign up to your freemium product, and let's say 10% of those would have some use for whatever the feature set is that would encourage them to convert, only a small subset of those will convert. So the funnel is really, really very, very narrow at its lowest point. So low incremental cost is really important so that you don't burn yourselves out. A conversion lever that almost always grows is also very, very helpful. So again, my favourite example is Dropbox. In their case, it's storage, right? And most people, once they start to use a product, it's something like Dropbox, you're going to put more and more things in that over time. So for most people, yeah, there's a group of people who will consciously keep their Dropbox storage space below the level that allows them to have the product for free. It's a reasonable set of users. But for most people, they're going to be adding things to their Dropbox fairly constantly, and you'll notice things like the camera upload service that Dropbox now has is just a really clever way for Dropbox to ensure that your need for the product's always scaling up and up and up and up, and that maximises the number of people that could be interested in converting on their product or service. So I've talked quite a bit about Dropbox. I'll just mention how this applies to Appbot. When Stu and I first started working together, Appbot was originally built as a side project by Stu, and it wasn't built with the intention of commercialising it at any point. And so it was free. It was completely free all the time for everybody. There was no cap on usage, none of that. And to start off with, we left the free plan in place. And the downside of that for us was that, as I said, you need to be able to tick off those 3 criteria. And we do have a conversion lever that almost always grows. So the number of apps is the value metric that we use to price our plans. And most of the development houses that we work with are building more apps and releasing more apps fairly constantly. So that conversion lever does almost always grow. Coming back to this, we have a low incremental cost per user as well. So we tick that box. What we don't have is inherent virality. So there aren't enough people coming into the top of our funnel that we can really afford to have a free offering that just sits there all the time. We need every user to encounter that conversion lever. And so to do that, we've implemented a free trial, and I'm going to talk about free trials next. But I think what you'll find is that the majority of businesses are in that situation. Only about 18% of SaaS companies, according to the bulk of research that I've read, are using a freemium model, and it's because it is quite tough to scale up your revenues if there's always some element of the product available for free. Unlike free trials, so about 42% of SaaS businesses offer some kind of free trial, and I've got quite a bit of content to get through here, so I'm skimming over the top of this, and hopefully you guys will have questions about some of this stuff to come back to. I'm just going to cover off kind of the top questions that I've been asked about setting up free trials by other startups that I've worked with, and top questions that I've had to sort through for myself. And this is the first one that I usually come to is, should you be asking for a credit card when you put a free trial in place? And then the second one we're going to talk about is how long the free trial should be. So asking for a credit card. This is one of those slides that I almost took it out because there's no right answer to this question. I can't stand here and go, yes, you should definitely ask for a credit card, which would obviously be my preference if I was listening to this talk. I'd want to be given the answers. But the answer to this question is that every single business will respond to the implementation of a paywall differently. So it's impossible to predict how your target customers are going to respond if you require that people submit their credit card details up front before they even try the service out. So I recommend that you test it both ways, and you don't have to do this with complicated A/B testing software. In fact, in general, most of the things I talk about, I don't do with complicated A/B testing software, particularly when it relates to price, because it's pretty easy to get customers offside if they have an inconsistent experience. If they end up in segment A one day and segment B the following day and they see different prices on those 2 days, that's obviously not a very good experience. Likewise with asking for a credit card. If you've got someone that comes to your website more than once before they sign up, and you can get those statistics from Google Analytics by looking at the frequency of new users. if you've got people in that category, it's better not to use A/B testing software to test this out. What I'd suggest you do is just implement a paywall for a period of time. Have a look at how many signups you normally get, okay, and decide what period of time you think you're going to need the paywall in place to get a statistically significant sample of people who could convert. So I would always suggest that a statistically significant sample is like 100 potential signups. So how long does it normally take you to get 100 potential signups? Do you get that per day, per week, per month? That's the minimum time that you would need to test this out for. So put a paywall in place and see what it does to your conversion from visitor to trial, your conversion from trial to paid, the total revenue, because bear in mind a big portion of people who put in their credit card details do at least allow the first transaction to go through because they forget about it. And obviously your conversion rate from trial to paid. So those are the important metrics to track. Lifetime value, I think, is also quite a useful metric to track when you run this test, because if your lifetime value plummets and you've got a lot of customers who are letting that first transaction go through but then cancelling the service, then that's something that you need to think about strategically in terms of whether or not you might be alienating customers from ever returning to your service because they feel like they got ripped off by you the first time they visited. I need to take a breath. No. Okay. Cool. How long should a free trial be? There's lots of stats out there about this, and so I've read lots of different literature, and some of it's conflicting. So I've kind of taken averages of the things that I've read here. From what I understand, about 40% of businesses that offer a free trial offer it for a 30-day period. So that's the most common. About 14% offer it for 14 days and 4% for 7 days. And then everyone else is doing all kinds of random stuff. So there are companies that do a 60-day trial, there's companies doing 6-month trials. And those numbers, I think, are kind of interesting when you're new to this stuff and help to give you a bit of comfort about what the majority of people do. But my advice would be to try and think about it from the context of your own business and ignore what the average is getting up to. And the way that, the kind of approach that I use when I'm trying to decide how long a free trial should be is to think about how long it takes a customer to be successful on the product that I'm selling, okay? So if you're not sure what defines success for your customers, then before you even try and answer this question, I recommend that you get out and speak to some of those customers, whether it's face-to-face or whether you use digital surveys or something like that. But it's really, really important, and even more important for the next part of what I'm going to discuss with you today, to understand what a user perceives as succeeding with your product. What's the point where they start to get some value, where they have a kind of like, I get why I bothered to input my email address to yet another service that's going to send me lifecycle campaigns. So if you can answer that question, you'll be well on the road to having a good starting point for your free trial. But again, you guys are going to get bored of me saying this morning, again, it's something that you should also test out. We've tried a couple of different durations with Appbot. We started on 30 days and we're down to 14 days now. And actually, we're kind of getting to a point now where we're considering ditching our free trial altogether. That's a whole separate equation. And the reason for that is that either our pricing's too low or the companies that we're targeting just make decisions on the spot. So, yeah?
Can I make a comment? Sometimes the
Sure.
free trial should be designed to build your email list. Then you
Sure.
can remarket those people, and maybe not in every situation,
yeah.
but the goal is the free trial should build an email list, which then you can market to over a period of time.
For sure, and we certainly do that with our trial customers. You know, we take their email accounts and we whack them in Facebook and we retarget the hell out of them. We do that with Agworld as well. It's very successful. I guess whether that should be your objective or not kind of comes down to what your overall customer acquisition costs are and your tolerance for increases in that CAC. But it's a really good point. Yeah, so that's kind of my answer to how long a free trial should be. What do customers need to do to perceive themselves as succeeding on your product, and how long does it take for them to do that? I like to then apply a multiplier to that, so 1.5 to 2 times. So they not only succeed once, but hopefully they succeed a few times. And then you want to ask them to give you their hard-earned cash. Okay, so put your hand in the air if you've ever launched a product as free for early adopters with an intention that you're going to start charging for it later. There's one hand at the back. Yeah, yep. Cool. How many people of those that just raised their hands, any of you find that was a really productive strategy? Oh, right. Let me know in a month. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. So that's worked really well for you?
It opened up a door to questions that I could answer and improve my product before I started charging for support.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this because I think it's, I think for the majority of businesses, my belief is that it's best to start charging what you intend to charge in the long term right away. And the reason for that is that in every company that I've been involved with, the early adopters that you end up dealing with in the early days are, at best, a subset of your overall target customer group. And in some cases, they end up being like completely over here, and your target customers are like where Justin's sitting. There's no overlap in the Venn diagram, okay? And price point is one of the factors that can kind of lead you to be targeting a group of early adopters who are in no way related to your end target customer. And again, at Appbot we kind of have an example of this, largely because the product was initially launched with no plans for commercialization. So because it was free, almost all of the customers that signed up were actually developers. And now that we've been commercialized for about 4 months, we've found that the people that pay us are not developers. Almost none of them are developers. About 5% are developers. So there is a little bit of overlap in the Venn diagram, but it's like a little teeny weeny sliver. The people that actually pay us money are product managers. And the challenge there is that the feedback that we got from those early adopters about the direction that we should take with the product is not necessarily the direction that we need to be taking with the product if we want to actually sell it, okay? Because the needs of those two groups of customers are quite substantially different. So this is something to be aware of, and I'm not saying that it's the wrong thing to do to offer a product free for early adopters, but you need to be very, very cognizant of that potential pitfall. One of the companies that I'm an advisor to is currently offering their service at 1/12 of the cost that they plan to charge long term. And already we're seeing that the businesses that are interested in engaging with her at the price point that she wants to aim for in the long term are vastly different to the ones that have been signing up to the trial so far. So if it helps you to get a body of early adopters that can help you to shore up your product, do a whole bunch of beta testing and be confident about it, great. But just be very wary that they may be different groups of people that you end up targeting by having this strategy. Okay, so hopefully I've kind of convinced you that you're going to charge for something at this point. And then at that point, most founders, I know I've certainly done this, seem to go, right, cool, so I'm going to charge money. What the hell am I going to put in these packages? How do I work out what goes into my plans? And as founders, I mean, I know I do this, and hopefully there are some in the room that sympathise with this. We typically jump to metrics that are easy to track, or that align with our business costs very closely, or that are commonly used by our competitors as the metric that we should choose to govern which plan a customer will end up on. So that's what I mean by a value metric. And I've put an example up here just so that everyone's on the same page about what I'm talking about. Circled at the top there, you'll see this is the Appbot pricing page. And in red we've got Indie Plan 3 apps, Startup Plan 15 apps, Growth Plan 80 apps. And the number of apps a customer is tracking is, for our business, the primary value metric. You can see some of these other metrics also scale up, but we know from talking to our customers that those other metrics aren't really what causes someone to convert from one level of plan to the next level of plan. So how do you arrive at what that thing should be? It can be a lot harder than it sounds. And I've got, kind of some top tips that I'll follow on from after this slide. But again, I kind of have like a little 3-step litmus test thing that I go through in my head to try and work out whether the value metric that I think I should use is actually a useful one, a productive one for the company. So the first box that I believe you need to tick is that growth in that metric equals increased value for the customer. So in the case of Appbot, if you're tracking more apps, our customers tell us that the more they track, the better the value they get from us. So from a customer's point of view, the metric and their success are very closely aligned. The second box to tick is one that I kind of always neglected, to be honest, until probably about 6 months ago. Penny really dropped on this towards the end of my time at Agworld. It's super, super important that the value metric you pick is really easy to understand. And by that, I mean, picture this. Can you communicate it in sort of that number of characters? Because that's what you'll need to be able to do, right? When Stu and I first started working together, we were talking about maybe making reviews, like the number of reviews that a company is getting, the value metric that we use to govern which plan you're on. And the problem is that whilst that's not super hard to understand, it's super hard to predict, right? So as a product manager, it'd be really hard for me to know how many reviews I'm going to get in a given period of time, because reviews tend to come in big spikes when you have a release and so forth. You know, some of the examples that I can give you here are email marketing companies, so particularly those doing lifecycle email. They'll typically bracket the number of emails you send, and that's their primary value metric. There's usually features that also cause you to scale up from one plan to another. But often the volume of email that you're sending or receiving is the thing to track. At Agworld, I remember we had lots of discussions about considering going down a per acre model. So Agworld provides software that helps you to understand what's going on your whole property. We had lots of conversations about that, and you know, later in the game, you get a lot less flexibility to decide what your value metric's going to be, because you'll be limited by the technology behind your product, and it won't be so easy to change from A to B. And whilst we were all like agreed that that was probably an interesting value metric, it wasn't something that we were going to be able to technically implement easily. So, but you know, it's easy to understand and easy to predict for the customer, and was probably better aligned to growth in that metric equaling increased value than the pricing model that we had, which is per user. I'm going to talk about per user in a second. So in the case of Appbot, the number of apps, as I mentioned earlier, is something that tends to grow with our customers over time. And in fact, most of the enterprise inquiries that we get come from customers that send us an email that goes something like this. Hi, I'm such and such from company blah, and I currently have 578 apps, but we're releasing 2 new apps a week. So we feel very confident that that metric does scale up as our customers grow over time. And that's a really helpful thing, because the more growth your customers are seeing in that value metric, the better they feel about using your service, because their value from the product is growing. But importantly for you as a company, your opportunity to convert them onto a higher plan level will also be fairly regular and reasonably predictable. I'm just going to put this in here because it's something that I really, really, really wrestled with, and I spent heaps of time researching this when I first started at Agworld. And this isn't always the case, but a hot tip for you guys is that your value metric is probably not the number of users that are using the service. There are a couple of notable, obvious exceptions to that rule. So, for example, CRM software. You need people. The more people that can access that, the more value the company gets out of it, right? Customer support software, same thing. The more agents you've got engaged in customer support, the better your usage of that software is likely to be. But per users pricing models are a kind of a legacy of the 1980s model of software sales, where you bought a CD and you installed it on your desktop. And in that case, actually, it wasn't even the number of users; it was the number of computers, right? But it's been carried forth into sort of SaaS pricing methodology these days. But there are very few companies I can think of outside of customer support and CRM that have experienced explosive growth that charge based on this model. So think it through really, really, really carefully. And if you're not sure, ask your customers like whether they think they get more value by having more of their team using your product, right? beware the founder pitfall. I do this, definitely. You know, I'm like, yeah, my product's so freaking awesome that of course if more of you guys are using it, you're going to be getting better value. But that's not always the case. And one simple way to identify that is that if you see your customers creating workarounds so that they can have multiple people accessing your product or service, so using generic email addresses like marketing@appbot.co, that's a really good hint that it's unlikely that your value metric should really be based on the number of users that you've got engaged with your software. You know, in the case of like marketing and analytics software, it's very rare, even in very big companies, that you have more than 5 to 10 active users of the product, and a proportion of those are actually management, right? So they just want an overview that they're not actively using the service on a daily basis. And to charge those people actually just kills one of your key metrics, which is the number of daily, weekly or monthly active users, depending on what unit of time you bid, that you actually have. Because if you're charging per user, you're inherently encouraging your customers to have fewer people engaged with your product or service. So that's kind of my view about number of users, and there are definitely exceptions to that rule other than the ones that I've mentioned. But I just encourage you, when you come to pricing your business, to be hard on yourself about that one, and not immediately jump to, well, obviously every user that pays up that signs up is going to pay. Yeah.
Would there be any alternatives for CRMs and that sort of, like the ones you said that would normally use users? What would there be their second choice?
That's a really awesome question. Yeah, I'm sure that there are alternatives, but whether they fulfill all of those three criteria well is a different kettle of fish. So the most challenging of those three litmus tests is the easy to understand and easy to predict one, I think, in that case. So you could do something like number of support tickets, for example. But the thing is, like, is it easy to understand or predict? Yes, it's probably very proportional to customer value, but it's hard to predict. So, you know, that'll kill your conversion rate. So off the top of my head, I can't think of any, but, you know, that'd be an interesting thing to kind of sort through. I saw another hand kind of lurking in the stratosphere over here. No? Shall I keep going? No? Cool. Okay, cool. So that often kind of leads you to this question. So I've picked a value metric, but what about what it's costing me? Like, what if that's in tension with the way that you plan to charge for the service? And that this is a difficult one to solve, but in general, lots of companies that I've been involved with jump to business cost as being a way to find that value metric. And if you go out and talk to your customers, in all of my experiences at least, I found that the customers really couldn't care less about what I'm paying to run the software, you know, what my server costs are, etc., etc. I've always found these campaigns about, you know, we need you to donate to help us cover our existing costs interesting. And those campaigns typically really, really struggle, and it's because the customer doesn't really care. What they care about is whether they're getting something that's meaningful for them. Like, everyone's pretty selfish, sadly. So I would encourage you to think about whether or not what it costs you to deliver the service is going to scale up in a disproportionate way to the way that you envisage your revenue growing based on the value metric you've chosen. Now, if that's the case, you've got a problem, right? Because you need to build a sustainable business as well. And if that's the answer to that, if the answer to that question is yes, that's likely to happen, I would encourage you to go looking through your product for some other different value metrics that you could align your pricing to that won't cause a disproportionate scaling in cost relative to your growth. But if it's not going to make any difference, right? If your business costs are not going to scale at a rate that outstrips your growth in revenue, then I would encourage you to just put this aside and not worry too much about it. Okay, so hopefully now you've kind of getting to the point where you know what you're going to charge for, and then this is always the one that I think most people struggle with. How much? Like, pick a number between 1 and 20,000, you know. But again, there are some kind of useful rules of thumb that I think you can apply to help you arrive at this conclusion. Now, the bad news for you guys is I don't have a magic formula. So what I'd really love to do is have a whiteboard here, and I go over here and I write price equals blah, 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 and give you some way that you can just go, you know, value metric times blah or whatever. But the reality is that there is no such magical answer to that question. And how much you should charge really depends on what your customer is prepared to pay. And the only way that you can find that out is to test. But I do have a bunch of tips for you, things that I've learned, assumptions that I worked to with the first few pricing grids that I controlled that sort of led me to the conclusion that some of the things I thought were important actually weren't very meaningful to the end user. And the first one is that it's not about maths, okay? So if we flip back to that earlier slide with the Appbot pricing page, I'm just going to talk you through what I mean about that. So if you imagine each of those apps is a foozle, right? And I'm charging for foozles in my product. If I took my price points and I just lost the indie one and shuffled the feature sets along one, right? So that the customer signing up for 3 apps was now paying $40 a month, the customer paying for 15 apps was now paying $65 a month, and so forth. What I would likely find is that the proportion of users signing up to each of those different plans probably wouldn't shift a great deal. And the reason I say that is because most customers will self-segment. So they'll look at your pricing page and they'll work out where they think their company or their service fits into that schema. And that's, it's a reason why the name of your plans is quite important, and going with generic plan names is not such a good idea, because you can actually funnel people into buying the version of your software that you want by naming your plan the right thing. But maths is not it. People don't care about the number of foozles in a plan. They care about whether they feel like there's a fit between the value proposition and their stage of business. So don't over-engineer the maths. Stu and I still do this all the time, so I'm really, kind of preaching something I find very hard to practice, but yeah, it really isn't about maths, so divorce yourself from that if you possibly can. Transparency and simplicity makes for happy users. So I had a fun example of this at Agworld. The first time I saw the Agworld pricing page, it was sold in a modular form, so customers had to kind of work out for themselves what they needed to purchase. And a few months later, we changed that dramatically. So we took all the features that a customer could have bought as individual components and we packaged them together into products similar to the pricing page we just looked at. And the difference in the conversion rate just from doing that was astonishing, and the customer feedback about it was like, oh yeah, right, so there's only really kind of 2 products I can really buy. Oh well, I'm not the big guy, so I'm going to buy the small one. So making it simple and easy for your customers to understand, reducing the number of decisions they make is really, really, really important in making them happy. And transparency, in my experience, is a very positive thing. And I regularly come across businesses that are not transparent in their pricing. So how many businesses have you seen where the pricing page just says contact us, right? Super, super frustrating, and just by having that in place, you really limit the number of inquiries you're going to get, because people want to be able to understand it off the bat and maybe not convert on the spot, but at least get an idea for whether the price point that you have in mind is even remotely similar to the price point that they've got in mind. And so Stu and I had some glorious validation of that particular point about 2 weeks ago. We just automated our enterprise plans, so you can now self-serve them. You can just sign up and just pay us your sweet enterprise dollars, and like that day, we had a conversion, and and we'd never spoken to this company before ever, and they signed up to our $500 a month plan with no conversation. And prior to that, we had a super long sales cycle for enterprise customers. Tons of emails, multiple calls. But just by making it obvious what people were going to get, bang, we got a conversion straight out of the gate. And it was, it took so little effort for us that we were just like, oh, thank God for that. Coming toward the end of top tips on determining price. Price testing can actually be really, 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 really easy. Don't overcomplicate it for yourselves. I read lots of blog posts about how to do this when I was at Agworld, and I still read them now. And a lot of them advocate kind of, setting up A/B testing software to do this kind of stuff. And and you know, they talk about all the pitfalls and all the risks of customers seeing different prices on multiple visits and whatever. You don't have to get that complicated with it. One of the most awesome blogs that I subscribe to, and if anybody is interested afterwards, I'll tweet a bunch of my favourite blogs about this kind of stuff so that you guys can follow them as well, because there are some super smart people out there, and you know, if you go and read those blogs, you will find that much of the stuff I've shared with you has come from a handful of really good, intelligent people who regularly write about this stuff. But price testing can be super straightforward. So, you know, again, you need to work out what time scale you need to run a test for in order to get kind of statistically significant results, okay? So have a look at the time that it takes for you to get 100 conversions normally, or whatever the unit you choose is, right? And plan to run your test for at least that length of time. Stu and I, very regularly, will launch a change to our pricing. We'll be like, oh, no one's bought it, and we launched it like 3 hours ago. Oh shit, we better change it. And you know, then we'll spend like 45 minutes arguing with ourselves about whether or not we'll be like, it's really irresponsible, you know, we really haven't let that test run, but we should just change it because no one's bought it yet. But it's really irresponsible, you know, we haven't really let the test run. Just be disciplined with yourselves about it. And you know, all you need to do is change your marketing website, change your pricing in the back end, and let it run. See what happens for whatever that period of time you've determined is statistically significant. Don't overcomplicate things. Stu and I have changed our pricing 3 times in 4 months. And you know, the amount of difference that a price increase can have to your overall revenue is not to be underestimated. This is probably some of the most valuable testing work you're ever going to do in your lives. We've more than doubled what we were charging from the initial pricing structure that we had in place. And you know, the month that we implemented that, we had 150% growth in our revenue. So, you know, it can make a super big difference, and not because of the volume of conversions. Yeah.
So do you apply the pricing to your existing customers, or do you keep them on the same?
That is a so awesome question. Thank you for asking that. So the best practice is not to. So generally speaking, we don't. We grandfather users onto the old plans. But what we do, and I learnt this from a smart email marketing company called getvero.com, is we put existing customers on their same plans and we let them stay there for as long as they want. So we've got some people that are paying us $8 a month, believe it or not. I cry a little bit inside every time one of those transactions happens. But you know, with those customers, what we do is when we release new features, so a few weeks ago we released a thing called the sentiment dashboard, and we've seen a big portion of our customers are now converting on a higher plan so that they can get access to that. We don't give those grandfathered customers access to the new features. So in order for them to get access to those new things, they have to get themselves onto the pricing that's aligned with our current pricing model. So that's how we do it. We've had no kickback from that at all. I've been the customer in that equation as well, and I think it's quite a nice experience for people. Yeah.
Do you charge for support?
Difficult to answer in very few words. No is the answer. So all plans get email support, but on our enterprise plans, you get a person who's dedicated to killing themselves to make you happy. Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm in the WordPress space, and when I started 6 months ago, I did the free support.
Yep.
And just last week, I finally implemented priority support at $199 and $299 a year.
Yep.
And like you had a massive result in price increase, I've also had the same explosion, which I'm like, why the hell didn't I do this 6 months ago when I first launched with the priority support pricing? And I'm even getting a lot of people saying, thanks for offering priority support.
Yeah. So that's a great example of a conversion lever, and you know, there's probably lots of different types of SaaS companies in the room. For many businesses, there'll be something in your business that has the same impact that offering priority support has had on yours. So, you know, for us, it's been implementing the sentiment dashboard. Like, that's the thing that people just want to jump up a level for. Don't go looking for silver bullets too much, though, guys, because in SaaS, they're hard to come by. You want constant incremental improvement. That should be your objective. There's an amazing video that Matt introduced me to, actually, called The Long Slow Ramp of SaaS Death, by Gail Goodman, who's the CEO of Constant Contact. It's awesome. Watch it. But yeah, it's a really good point. Like, finding that feature that customers are prepared to pay for can be hugely valuable. Last thing I'm going to talk about really on the determining price front is don't assume that your competitors have got the answers. I've definitely fallen into this trap, and much more so back in the days of e-commerce. I used to compulsively monitor this, and I had expensive software that crawled the web for me every night and told me if anybody had changed their pricing on frontline fleet control by a penny. But I think in the SaaS context, it's really, really important to apply your own rigor to this process and your own structured thought process, rather than assume that your competitors have a model that is replicable that you should be going after. Because quite frankly, if they're not like an incumbent giant in your vertical, if they're not realestate.com.au or carsales.com or something of that nature, then they probably haven't perfectly nailed it either, right? So think it through for yourselves. Don't be tempted to just model yourself off what someone else is doing. And that's it. Thanks, guys. Just you, yeah.
I have heard that you should never have more than 3 pricing options. That's one thing. One of our competitors, Oscar Boss, actually has 12 different options on that homepage. And
Whoa.
I can't imagine the customers must be completely baffled at
That makes my brain hurt.
sign up for.
Yeah.
And I had a second one which was commenting about this $80,000 billing software. The people who are looking to buy that are actually trying to buy consulting, and that's why they're prepared to pay tens of thousands of dollars. So if you start to offer that option, you start to turn into a consulting company. And I've read on the web about people who do this, and they love it, but they're sort of like one-man companies, and the products are sidelined with consulting to it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. So in answer to your how many plans should you have?
Yeah.
The numbers that I've come across in my reading travels are that for every additional plan that you offer on your pricing page, you can expect a reduction between 5 and 7% in the conversion rate to paid overall. So every additional decision is going to reduce your conversion rate by 5 to 7%. Yeah. You've had that experience, Mike?
No, I was just saying you should just have one in the case.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in an ideal world, but again, like customers want to segment themselves. They want to feel like they're getting good value. And something that I didn't really touch on that's probably relevant is you will have seen on that Appbot pricing page, we've got 3 apps, 15 apps, and 80 apps as our 3 different pricing levels. And the conclusion that we've reached in the last couple of weeks about that 3rd pricing level is that 80 apps is actually too many for that group of customers. So they feel like they're buying more than they really need, and people do not like to be paying for shit that they're not going to use. So don't be afraid to kind of cut back on the volume of stuff that you're offering in your plans as well if you find from your customers' feedback that it's too much. Yeah.
Do you feel like there's a point where that advice breaks down? Like, for instance, would you simplify the pricing model of someone like Amazon Web Services, or is there actually a way to take something as complex as that and then simplify it?
I think there's always a way to simplify most things, but it's really it's a question of your sales model. And Amazon Web Services, for the chunky money that they bring in, the larger sales that they get, that flexibility means that they can really maximise the quotes that they're putting out to big business, and that's why their pricing model is what it is. So the greater the human input into the sales funnel, in my experience, the greater complexity you can get away with. So it's really a question of scale. Like, at what scale do you want to be signing people up? That's what you have to cater to. So yes, there is a point at which that advice breaks down, and at which, if you've got a human sales team supporting your sales effort, then you can probably go nuts on the complexity angle, because it doesn't matter, the customer doesn't have to work it out for themselves. Yeah.
I know from my own experience that there's a price point where people will just buy it if they see enough value. When it's a singular total price, for example, $200 is the price point where someone will take their credit card out of their wallet and buy a product.
Yep.
But I found that over $200, it's a different sale. But on the monthly, how does that relate back to monthly? Is it $47 a month is like a no-brainer, or is it a $32 a month is a no-brainer, or because I'm sure the $4.99 requires 50 emails to the directors about enterprise software.
So the best way to answer that question that I found is to find out who it is in the target customer's business that drives the decision?
Yeah.
And are they the same person who are parting with the money, right? And if they're not, then you can typically not get away with charging as much, right? So in our case, generally speaking, what happens is we've got product managers in a big product team who love the software, and they have to push their VP of sales or their team leader to convert on the product.
Yeah.
So the team leader is not the dude who's getting the value from the product, which means he's inherently less inclined to pay for it from stop, right? And then the other important consideration I would put in there is find out what line items in the customer's budget you're competing with and what the size of those line items are. So if whatever you build could save someone from hiring a staff member, where are those customers based? Because let me tell you, what you can charge is vastly different if you target customers in the Philippines and they can hire someone for $8,000 US a year versus someone in, Australia, for example. So yeah, those are the factors that I think are really critical in working that out. But it really comes down to nutting out who it is that you deal with and are they the same person making the decision. There's also something to consider around size of credit card transactions. So in different markets, they'll have different thresholds for how much a customer can put through on the company card without going through the expense process first.
Right.
So that's also something that you need to research, and it varies dramatically from market to market. It's vastly different in India than it is in the USA.
Yeah, it's like a no-brainer for your own credit card, $200. But if you have to put $200 a month on a company card, you're like, hang on, got to go through all this paperwork.
Will you have to justify it? That's the question.
Okay.
So if you don't have to justify it, you want to max out the point at which...
Like 39 or 28 or whatever it is.
Whatever, yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So that steers you towards monthly rather than annual, because each transaction is much smaller and can slip through the system.
Yes and no. I mean,
More paperwork.
we have both. We have monthly and annual, and you get 2 months free if you buy the annual subscription. And everything I've read suggests that kind of optionality is really worthwhile. Certainly for Stu. What's that?
Worthwhile in what respect?
Worthwhile in terms of the revenue value of it. So for Stu and I, again, we had a very big jump in our revenue when we introduced annual pricing, and we also had an overall jump in our conversion rate of about 40%. So quite a significant jump. And it was, it's just the value proposition thing. It's because most of our customers are actually businesses and not individuals. So
they've evaluated that it's worthwhile let's get it for a period which is cheaper.
They feel like they're getting something free, basically, yeah. So yeah, if you can offer both, it's better, generally speaking. Yeah. Again, something to test. I did a lot of research about this back in the Agworld days as well. What do most companies offer? And the majority offer monthly only. It's a very small portion, or at least when I did this research a couple of years ago now, it was a very small portion that were offering a choice. And I think I've noticed personally that's become increasingly common, and I'm sure it's because other businesses experience the same uplift from it that we do. It's great for cash flow. Yeah.
After having changed the prices several times for your trials, how do you keep an overview over your customers who pays what, or who should have how many apps?
All of that. So we've automated all of that. So we as I said, we grandfather customers onto whatever plan they signed up to. So when we change the pricing, if they're on the middle plan, they don't have to pay the new middle price in their next pricing cycle. They pay whatever they've been paying previously, and we just do that by adding more plans. So we just keep the old plans sitting there. Our plans all have an ID in our back end, and we just add a new set of plans. So if customers want to jump between them, a customer that's on plan 2, which is the original kind of middle plan, they would have to now jump onto plan 8 if they wanted to sign up to the middle plan, for example. Yeah. End users who are kind of solo indie guys, yes, and that's okay because they're not really our target market anymore. Yeah.
Well, is that, do you still have Appbot free in Appbot X that you charge for?
What was that?
Do you still have Appbot that's free in Appbot X that you
No.
charge for?
So the only customers that are still getting Appbot for free are those that signed up to Appbot before we implemented commercial plans. Yeah, like Mike. Yeah.
Last question for Claire. You want to take us?
Do you ever look at some of the apps that customers put out on those enterprise plans and think, what on earth are they doing with the App Store?
Yeah, all the time. The good news is that they're often thinking, what on earth are we doing with the App Store? And we can really help them with that. So yeah.
All right, Claire, thank you very much.
Thank you.
As I said earlier, we've now got some time for networking. I highly encourage you to meet the folks that have come here today, talk to them about where they're at in their journey, learn something from them. Claire may be able to stick around for a little while if you didn't get a chance or were too scared to ask a question. Please come see her.
Yeah, I'm going to be here till about 9.